The locksmith handed Preston the keys at 2 in the afternoon. 3 keys, plain ring. Preston took them without looking at the man, dropped them into his breast pocket, and patted his chest once the way you pat your pocket after you've confirmed your wallet is still there. Transaction complete. Move on. Miriam was standing on the sidewalk, 12 feet away. 1 suitcase, 1 cat carrier. Fig inside a child, a 7-year-old gray tabby who was currently watching Preston through the mesh with the particular blank attention of a creature that has made its assessment and found nothing worth reacting to. 19 years of marriage, $58,000. 30 days to vacate, she'd been gone in 4. She'd packed light. The things she actually used, the things that were actually hers, her mother's watch, the books she'd read, the coffee mug she'd bought herself on a trip Preston hadn't wanted to take. She left behind 4 rooms of things that had never quite felt like hers anyway. The suitcase had a broken wheel, had been broken for 2 years, pulled left every 3rd step. She'd kept meaning to fix it. She was still meaning to fix it as she stood on the sidewalk and watched a locksmith install new deadbolts on a door she had walked through 10,000 times. Preston came down the front steps at 2:22. Cassandra Lee was with him, 29 years old, his associate at Whitfield Legal Partners for the past 3 years. She was standing close, not touching, but close enough that the distance itself was a statement. Preston noticed Miriam still on the sidewalk. He could have pretended not to. He didn't. His expression softened. Not with regret, with the particular softness of a man who has decided to be gracious in victory and wants witnesses to his graciousness. Across the street, Dorothy Baird had stopped pretending to deadhead her roses. The kid from the Nguyen house was doing slow loops on his bike at the corner, watching everything. Preston knew they were there. He always knew when people were watching. Miriam. Just her name. Gentle, like he was reminding her of something she'd forgotten. I want you to know I don't hold any of this against you. I really don't. Marriages end. That's just life. He paused, giving the words room. Aldrich tells me the settlement was actually quite generous, given the circumstances. I think when you've had some time to get perspective, you'll see that. Cassandra was looking at her phone. You're 58, Miriam. That sounds scary, I know. But honestly, a clean slate at 58, a lot of women would be grateful for that. A chance to figure out what you actually want. He let that sit for a moment. I genuinely hope you'll be smart with it this time. This time. He said it softly, with concern in his voice, in front of Dorothy Baird and the Nguyen kid and anyone else who happened to be watching. That was the thing about Preston. He never needed to raise his voice. Miriam looked at him, not with anger, not with tears. She looked at him the way you look at something when you're making sure you're seeing it clearly, making sure the picture you're taking will be accurate when you look at it later. 3 seconds. Then she looked down at Fig. Fig had been watching Preston the entire time. Not with hostility, the cat didn't waste energy on hostility, just watching, taking inventory. And now as Miriam looked down, Fig blinked once, slowly, completely, and looked away. Just like that. Done. The cat had already decided. Miriam picked up the carrier, picked up the suitcase. It pulled left, same as always. She walked down the front path, through the gate, and turned north on the sidewalk. Preston said something else behind her. She didn't catch it. Her feet were moving, and the broken wheel was pulling left, and Fig was quiet in the carrier, and those were the only things that needed her attention right now. She did not look back. Not because she was too proud to, not because it would hurt too much. She didn't look back because there was nothing back there she needed. And somewhere in the last 30 steps, that had stopped feeling like a loss and started feeling like something else. Something she didn't have a word for yet. She had $58,000 in a checking account. She had a suitcase that pulled left. She had a gray cat named Fig who had looked away from Preston Whitfield first. She walked north because north was away and away was enough for now. About 4 blocks out, a name came back to her. Not a plan. More like something surfacing from below the way things return when you stop trying to remember them. 4 months ago. Late. She'd been almost asleep in the guest room she'd been sleeping there for 7 months, though neither of them had acknowledged it. Preston on the phone down the hall, voice low, not whispering, but not carrying either. The Garrison Street account. Move it before the 15th. All of it. She hadn't understood it then. It was just one of 1,000 fragments of his work life that had floated through the house over the years, none of them meant for her. But she remembered it now. Garrison Street. She didn't know why it mattered. Maybe it didn't. She filed it the way you file things when you don't have a category for them yet, carefully, without deciding what it means. She kept walking. The suitcase pulled left. Fig rode quietly, watching the city go by. She found a diner 3 blocks from everything she used to own and sat at the counter and did the math. Not because she wanted to, because she needed to see the real number, not the one she'd been telling herself while the lawyers were still talking. The one that didn't have hope built into it. She opened the calculator on her phone. Studio apartments, the cheapest she'd found that allowed cats, was $2,900 a month. Most were $3,100, $3,200. She typed in $3,100. Hit the division sign. Typed $58,000. 18 months. Before food. She added food $400 a month if she was careful. Her phone bill. Her knee prescription, which Preston's insurance had covered and hers now wouldn't. The cost of a policy on the open market at 58 with a pre-existing condition. She did that math too. The number 14 months. She looked at it for a moment. Then she put her phone face down on the counter. Under the counter, Fig shifted in the carrier. Miriam put her foot against it, not to hold it still, just to feel it there. The small warmth of another living thing going about its business. 14 months. After that, nothing, unless something changed. She drank her coffee. Left a $4 tip on a $3 cup because the woman behind the counter had refilled it without being asked, and some habits you keep regardless. She walked for 2 hours. Not toward anything. Walking was how she thought the motion of it. Something about moving through space that made the inside of her head quieter. The suitcase pulled left. She compensated without thinking. 10,000 repetitions of emotion will do that. She moved through the old part of the city where buildings still had their original faces. She passed a public library open until 8 weekdays and noted it. A 24-hour pharmacy 2 blocks east. A laundromat on the corner, lights still on, a woman inside folding something at the long table. She was building a map. She'd been trained to do it years ago before Preston, when she'd spent her days documenting old buildings for preservation assessments. You walk a neighborhood and you read it. You learn what's there before you decide what it means. She passed a man sleeping on a heating grate near a parking garage entrance. He had a sleeping bag, a backpack with a small padlock on the zipper, and a jacket folded carefully under his head. Not thrown down, folded. Like it mattered to him how he slept even here. Miriam didn't look away. He found a warm spot, she thought. He solved the problem he had. She kept walking. The light was almost gone when she turned onto a street she didn't know. The sign read, Garrison Street. Her feet stopped. Not because the name meant anything yet. But her feet stopped the way feet sometimes do when the rest of you is still catching up. She looked up. 8 stories of limestone 1920s construction. Scaffolding on 2 sides. A banner across the 3rd Continental Fidelity Building. Luxury residential conversion occupancy, spring 2026. At the base of the building, half hidden by the scaffolding's shadow, a metal grate set flush into the sidewalk. 4 feet square, rusted at every edge, weeds through the seams. A padlock so corroded it barely looked like a mechanism anymore, more like something the sidewalk had slowly grown around. Beside it, bolted into the foundation stone, a cast-iron plate, Garrison Street Station, Continental Transit Authority, Estone. 1931, Miriam stood 6 feet away and read it. She took out her phone. Garrison Street Station. Closed 1951, decommissioned when the downtown loop was reconfigured. Sealed since. She typed the building name. Continental Fidelity Savings and Trust, seized by federal regulators 1974. Fraud investigation. Assets transferred to acquiring institution. The building above this grate had housed a bank. That bank had been seized for fraud. The station beneath it had been sealed for 70 years, and as far as anyone could tell, forgotten. Miriam filed this the way she'd filed the library hours as a coordinate. Something that might matter or might not. She had no idea it was the most important thing she would ever read on a phone screen. She put her phone away. Fig had been quiet the whole walk, but now Miriam felt the carrier shift, felt Fig move to the front nose against the mesh, pointing downward toward the grate, reading something in the air, coming up through the rust and the years. Miriam watched her. The padlock was corroded through. One good pull, maybe less. She looked up and down the street, a delivery truck 2 blocks west moving away. Nobody else. She looked at the grate. She looked at Fig. She had maybe 30 minutes of light left. The padlock didn't resist. It crumbled, decades of rust releasing all at once, a dry sound like old chalk. And then it was just weight in her hand. Not a lock anymore. Not a barrier. Just metal that used to mean something. She got her fingers under the grate and lifted. Heavy. She had to plant her feet and use her whole back the way you lift something when there's no one around to help. It came up 40 degrees before she could prop it with the scaffolding pipe. Enough. Concrete steps going down. The air that rose cool, dry. Not the smell of standing water or mold or anything that would make you step back. Just stillness. Earth and old metal and air that had been left completely alone for a very long time and had grown used to the quiet. Fig lifted her nose to it. Held there, didn't flinch. Miriam looked at the cat, looked at the steps. All right, she said. Not to Fig, not to herself, to whatever was down there. She picked up the carrier, picked up the suitcase, and she went. 31 steps. She counted without meaning to. At the bottom, a corridor arched ceiling. White tile cracked in places, but still holding. Her phone flashlight threw a narrow beam, the space absorbed without giving much back. The corridor opened ahead of her. And then it opened. Miriam stopped walking. The platform was long, 60 meters, maybe more. The ceiling vaulted overhead in one continuous arch, tiled in white with a border pattern running the full length in deep green and amber. Art Deco geometry, precise and clean, the kind of design that meant someone had cared. Not just about function. About the people who would stand here. About what they'd see while they waited. Cast iron columns at regular intervals. Brass light fixtures hanging in a row down the center, bulbs long gone. but the metalwork still there, tarnished to the color of old honey, still holding its shape after 70 years of no one looking at it. On the walls, a war bond poster, 1943, a cigarette advertisement for a brand that no longer existed. The whole frozen mid-sentence, a city's morning commute stopped in place, waiting for passengers who never came back. She turned one slow circle with her phone light. She was the only person who had stood here since 1951. The thought arrived without drama. No one had been here. Then no one knew this existed. Then, quieter than either of those, the one that mattered most, no one was coming to take it. At the far end of the platform, a door. Stenciled lettering mostly gone, station manager. She tried the handle. It turned. Inside 4 meters by 4. Same white tile, same green border. Concrete floor dry. She pressed her palm flat against it. Dry. A door that closed from the inside. She set the suitcase down. Not dropped, set the way you put something down when you've decided it belongs somewhere. She opened the carrier. Fig stepped out with the deliberate care of a cat, conducting an official inspection, each paw placed nose down, slow circuit of the room. Left wall, back wall, right wall, the corner by the door, the center of the floor. Then Fig sat down in the exact middle of the room and faced Miriam. Miriam looked at her. She sat down on the floor, back against the wall. And for the first time since 2 in the afternoon, since the locksmith, and the breast pocket pat, and the long walk, and the 14 months, she let her spine go. Just that. Just released the thing she'd been holding since she stood on that sidewalk. She turned off the flashlight. Complete dark. The kind you don't find on the surface anymore, no gradation, no shapes emerging as your eyes adjust. Just dark total, like the room had been poured full of it. Fig found her in about 4 seconds and settled against her side, warm and solid. And from above, not as sound, more as a sensation in the floor and the wall and her own bones, Miriam felt the living city moving. The transit system trains running through nearby tunnels, their weight and rhythm passing through a century of stone and earth. A pulse. Regular, indifferent, continuous. She was under it. Hidden in it. Unknown to it. She waited for the fear. It didn't come. She had not been afraid of the dark. She'd been afraid of something else for a long time, longer than she'd realized. Preston's silences when she'd said something he'd decided was beneath him. The way he'd look at her across a dinner table, not angry, just measuring, calculating the cost of her. The feeling of editing herself in her own kitchen, in her own bed, in her own life. That signal didn't reach down here. And in the dark, she was nobody's definition of anything. She didn't explain the decision, not even to herself. Some things don't require explanation. Some things just require the courage to stay still in the dark and wait to see what your eyes find when they adjust. She woke in complete darkness. Her first thought, 6 hours, maybe 7. She checked her phone. 6:47 a.m. She had slept almost 10 hours. Fig was still against her side, warm and unbothered. Miriam lay there a moment and took stock the way you do after an accident, checking each part before deciding to move. Back ached from the concrete. Mouth dry. Cold in a manageable way. Everything else was quiet. Not numb. Not shut down. Quiet. The specific quiet of a mind that has, for the first time in a long time, nothing to brace against. She sat up. Turned on her phone flashlight. Fig opened one eye, determined this didn't require her involvement, and went back to sleep. Okay, Miriam said. To herself this time. Day 2. She was out through the grate before the street woke up gray light. A sanitation truck, working the next block over, not coming this direction. She replaced the grate carefully, pulled the broken padlock back through the latch so it looked from a distance like it was still holding. 3-block radius. What did she have diner on Carver open at 6 single-occupancy bathroom before the morning rush? Library on Hensley Outlets, Wi-Fi tables where you could sit for hours. 24-hour pharmacy on the corner. Grocery 2 blocks east with a discount rack near the back. And the laundromat on Hensley she'd noted the night before, lights still on a woman folding at the long table. She bought what she needed from 2 stores paying cash. LED lanterns, rechargeable battery packs, a hiking water filtration kit, a small camp stove, non-perishables. Cat food 2 kinds because Fig had opinions. Litter, Ziploc bags. She spent $190. She thought about what $190 meant against $300 in rent not spent. The math felt different than it had yesterday in the diner. Not desperate, strategic. Like she'd found a variable nobody had told her she was allowed to change. The laundromat on Hensley was called simply Ruth's, painted on the window, in dark green letters, no tagline, no hours, just the name. Miriam pushed the door open at 9:30 with a small bag of clothes. The woman behind the counter was somewhere in her 70s. Reading glasses on a beaded chain in orange and gold. A radio playing Nigerian gospel, not loud, just present. A library book open on the counter, thick, read with the focused attention of someone who is not going to be rushed. She looked up, looked at Miriam, looked at the carrier on the floor with Fig visible through the mesh. Then she went back to her book. Miriam loaded a machine, sat down in one of the plastic chairs and stared at her phone, and found for the moment that her thoughts wouldn't organize into anything useful. Her mind kept sliding off the list and landing on nothing. The machine humming, the gospel station low, the smell of detergent and warm air. A paper cup appeared on the chair beside her. Miriam looked at it, then looked up. The woman behind the counter had already gone back to her book. Black coffee. Hot. Not fancy. No explanation offered, none coming. Miriam looked at the cup for another second. Then she picked it up and drank it. Nothing was said. The gospel station played. Fig sat in her carrier and watched the dryers turn with the moderate interest of a cat who has found something worth watching. Miriam sat in that plastic chair and felt something loosen in her chest that she hadn't known was clenched. She didn't say thank you when she left. That would have made it a transaction, and it wasn't a transaction. It was just a person seeing another person and doing the small available thing. 7 blocks north, Preston Whitfield was on the phone. Jack, hey, you haven't heard from Miriam, have you? Just want to make sure she's landed somewhere decent. You know how she gets. He called Diane next. Same question, same answer. He set his phone down and looked out at the river. He wasn't worried. Miriam had $58,000 and no real experience managing anything on her own. She'd surface when the money got tight enough. They always did. He had been wrong about this for 19 years. He just hadn't had a reason to find out yet. Back underground, Miriam scrubbed a mattress. Found it that afternoon curb on Aldgate Street, free, clean, moving. She'd checked it carefully. Seams, corners, smell. Clean. She'd gotten it down the stairs in 3 stages. 40 minutes. Her shoulders told her about it afterward. She scrubbed it anyway, warm water from the camp stove, a clean cloth top to bottom. Not because it needed it, because it was hers now. This was how you made something yours. You put your hands on it. You worked it, and then it was different than it was before. She installed the LED strips along the top of the walls, connected them to the battery pack, turned them on. The white tile glowed. Warm, even light, the brass fixture on the ceiling picked it up and gave it back. Fig stepped off the mattress she'd claimed it the moment Miriam set it down and sat in the middle of the floor and looked around. Miriam looked around too. It looked like something. After 2 days of nothing, that was everything. Near the end of the evening, she explored the utility corridor off the far end of the platform. Old pipes, junction boxes, a wooden shelf that had mostly given up. She photographed everything habit from years of preservation work. Document what's there before you touch anything. On the shelf, a logbook, cloth cover water-stained but intact. She opened it. Maintenance records going back to 1942. Different handwriting. As the years passed, different men doing the work. Platform lights replaced pipe fittings adjusted. Routine. She turned to the last entry. March 14th, 1951. Station cleared per order. All equipment removed to depot. Platform and access corridor secured. All clear. Below that, a signature in neat, careful handwriting, E. Voss, Site Supervisor. Miriam looked at it for a moment. She photographed the page, the entry, the date, the signature. Filed it in the folder on her phone labeled Station. She didn't know why she kept it. She kept everything. Old habit, document what's there and let it tell you later what it means. She closed the logbook and set it back on the shelf. 7 blocks north, Preston Whitfield was making calls. Underground, Miriam Calloway was making a home. Neither of them knew yet which one was building something that would last. 3 weeks in, Fig stopped mid-step on the platform, one paw still raised, and turned her head toward the south tunnel. Miriam looked up from her book. The cat was statue still, not the loose stillness of a cat, considering a nap, but the locked wire taut stillness of a cat that has heard something it has decided to take seriously. Ears forward, tail low. Every line of her pointed in one direction. Then Miriam heard it too. Footsteps. The particular flat echo of boots on old concrete, getting closer at the pace of someone not in a hurry, but definitely coming. And a light, a flashlight beam, appearing around the curve of the tunnel, sweeping the walls, moving toward the platform. Miriam was off the couch, and behind it, in the same motion, no thought involved. She killed the LED strips. The platform went black. She pressed herself against the back of the couch and held completely still. Fig had not moved from where she was standing, but she had gone silent in a way that felt deliberate, the cat understanding, in whatever way cats understand things, that this moment required no sound from either of them. The flashlight came onto the platform. It swept the way a flashlight sweeps when someone is looking for structural issues, walls, ceiling columns, track bed. Professional, methodical. Then it slowed. It found the couch, the rug, the shelf of books along the far wall, the brass fixtures cleaned and catching the light, the platform tiles section by section, green and amber, emerging from the grime weeks of work, visible in the difference between the cleaned half and the uncleaned half. The flashlight stopped moving. A voice. Male. Mid-30s. Genuinely surprised. What the? Miriam stood up slowly. Hands visible, not raised over her head, just open at her sides. She was aware of how she looked, a woman in her late 50s behind a salvaged couch in an abandoned subway station at 11 at night. "I can explain," she said. The flashlight swung toward her. She didn't flinch. The man holding it wore a Navy Transit Authority uniform. The badge on his chest read, D. Reyes Tunnel Safety Division. He was maybe 34 with the kind of face that showed what he was thinking before he'd decided what to say. Right now it showed confusion, and underneath the confusion, something still working out what it was. He looked at her, then at the space around her, the couch, the rug, the books on the shelf she'd built from scrap lumber, the cleaned tiles, the LED strips along the walls. "How long?" he said. 3 weeks. He stepped onto the platform and moved along the near-wall flashlight angled down. He touched the cleaned tile with the flat of his hand, looked up at the vaulted ceiling, crouched and pressed his palm flat against the platform floor, the same way Miriam had pressed hers against the floor of the station manager's room on the first night. He stood up. "You're not a safety hazard." He said it like he was reading a finding into a report. "Structure's sound. No water damage. No risk to adjacent tunnels." A pause. "This place actually looks better than it did the last time I checked it. 2019. There was a rat problem, and about 4 inches of standing water near the south access. There were mice when I arrived," Miriam said. "Fig handled it." Then something moved at the far end of the couch. Fig walked out from behind it, unhurried tail up, and sat down on the platform 6 feet from Danny Reyes. She looked at him with the calm, measuring attention she reserved for things she hadn't yet classified. Danny looked at the cat. The cat looked at Danny. "She was back there the whole time," he said. Not a question. "Yes," Miriam said. He almost smiled. Didn't quite. "Why are you here?" he asked. Not accusatory, just asking. Miriam told him. Kept it short, no performing, no editorializing. The marriage, the settlement, the math, the 14 months, the grate, the padlock, the 31 steps. He listened without interrupting once. When she finished, he stood with his hands in his jacket pockets, looking at the middle distance somewhere between her and the south wall. Then he said, "My grandmother lost her house at 71. He said it plainly, the same way Miriam had told her story. "My grandfather died, and there was a clause in the mortgage nobody had explained to either of them. Bank called it in. 45 days. He paused. "She slept on my aunt's couch in Queens for 2 years before she got back on her feet," and he looked at Miriam. "I'm not going to be the reason that happens to someone else." No performance in it. No look that said, "Notice how good I'm being." Just a man who had seen something happen to someone he loved and had decided somewhere along the way that he wasn't going to be on the wrong side of it. He took a card from his jacket pocket, Transit Authority card, his name and number handwritten on the back. "Anyone else from the authority comes through, they'll use the south access. You'll have warning. Call me first. I'll handle the paperwork." Miriam took the card. "Thank you," she said. The first time she'd said those words to anyone since the divorce. He nodded, looked around the platform one last time, the cleaned tiles, the brass fixtures, the book's Fig still sitting in the middle of the floor, conducting her assessment. "You've got good taste," he said quietly, more to the station than to her. Then he walked back into the south tunnel and disappeared. The flashlight beam shrank and was gone. The sound of his boots faded until the station was quiet again. Miriam stood in the dark for a long time, not afraid. That was the first thing she checked, and it wasn't there. What was there was harder to name. Something between relief and grief, the way those two feelings sometimes arrive together when something you'd been bracing against simply doesn't happen. She sat down on the couch. Fig climbed into her lap, turned once, twice, and settled purring with the steady frequency of a small engine that knows its job. Miriam put her hand on the cat's back. She thought about Danny's grandmother, 71 years old, 45 days. 2 years on her aunt's couch before she found her footing. She thought about Ruth sliding a paper cup across the counter and going back to her book. She thought about E. Voss, that neat signature at the bottom of a 1951 maintenance log. All clear. Whatever he'd left behind when he walked back up those stairs. People left things. Most of them never knew if anyone found what they'd left. Most of them did it anyway. Fig purred. The station was quiet the way it had been quiet for 70 years before Miriam came down those stairs. But it was a different quiet now. She had been alone down here for 3 weeks. She was still alone. But it turned out those were two completely different things. Marcus Webb had been hired 3 weeks after Preston stopped making casual calls. He was methodical, had spent 11 years in insurance fraud before this, which meant he knew how to read a city for where people went when they didn't want to be found. He had checked hospitals, shelters, extended stay hotels. No credit card activity since day 9. She'd switched to cash, which told him more about her than Preston had mentioned. He had a photograph Miriam at a fundraiser. Dark coat hair up the composed expression of a woman at an event she hadn't chosen. He was good at this work. He had not yet thought to look down. 6 weeks underground, Miriam was on her knees on the platform with an old toothbrush and cleaning solution working the tile. The grime was old, not soft old, the kind that wipes away, but hard old, fused to the surface, requiring pressure and repetition, and the willingness to keep doing the same motion until your wrist aches and then keep going anyway, but underneath the green and amber border emerging. Art Deco geometry, designed by someone in 1931 who had decided the people passing through deserved something worth looking at. A centimeter of green appeared. She moved to the next section. It looked like archaeology. It felt like something she wasn't ready to name yet. She was just doing the work. The work was enough. Fig watched from the couch with the moderate interest of a cat supervising a project she has approved but declined to participate in. Week 5. Tuesday evening. Miriam arrived at Ruth's laundromat at closing time. Ruth was at the folding table working through a stack of sheets. The gospel station low. The fluorescent warmth of a room kept the same way for 20 years. Miriam loaded her machine. Then she looked at the stack on the table, clearly 40 more minutes of work, and walked over and picked up a sheet and started folding. Ruth watched her for a moment. Then Ruth picked up another sheet. They worked in silence. Miriam followed Ruth's lead, the specific way she squared the corners, the particular tuck at the end. After the third sheet, their rhythm matched without discussion. Two people who had both been folding laundry for 40 years, finding the same motion. 20 minutes. The stack came down. Ruth said without looking up from the last pillowcase. "You eating, co?" "Yes," Miriam said. Ruth looked at her then with the calm assessment of a woman who has heard a lot of yeses that meant something else. Every day. A pause that lasted 1 second too long. "Most days," Miriam said. Ruth set the pillowcase down. She went through the door to the back room and came back with a plastic container and a fork. Set them on the folding table. Went back to straightening the shelf. Miriam opened the container. Jollof rice, still warm chicken on the side, fried plantain tucked at the edge. The smell of it, tomato scotch bonnet. The smokiness of rice cooked in cast iron filled the front of the laundromat. She stood at the folding table and ate. Didn't sit down. Didn't make a production of it. Just received it, simply the way you receive something, when you understand that's the only right response. It was the best thing she had tasted in 6 weeks. She didn't say so. Ruth didn't ask. That was the whole point. Walking back to the station, Miriam thought about the word friend. She hadn't used it about anyone in years. Preston had a way of making her friendships feel like scheduling problems. "Do you have to see Janet again this week?" Not a prohibition, just a weight placed carefully every time, until the lunches stopped and she'd told herself it was just how life got busy. She'd seen the full erosion only when the divorce papers were filed, and she went through her phone looking for someone to call. 11 years of carefully applied friction, and she hadn't felt it happening. Ruth had never asked where Miriam lived. Miriam had never told her that arrangement. See what matters, leave the rest alone was the most honest relationship she'd had in a long time. The platform by end of week 7 looked like something a person had made on purpose. Green and amber border running 60% of the length glowing under the LED strips. The salvaged couch, the rug, the rewired floor lamp throwing warm light against the tile. Books along the east wall, a small framed print. A mirror she'd reframed herself from salvaged molding, mounted at eye height on the column nearest the station manager's door. She photographed it every few days, not to show anyone, to document what was possible. Week 6, Thursday afternoon. Marcus Webb stood on the sidewalk outside the Continental Fidelity building, clipboard in hand, looking up at the scaffolding. He was working a grid Dorothy Baird had placed Miriam walking north. He had 2 blocks left on his current sweep. He made a note about the scaffolding company signage, looked at the conversion banner, looked at the locked entrance, looked down at his clipboard. 4 feet below, on the other side of a rusted grate, half hidden by shadow, Miriam Calloway was sitting on a salvaged couch, reading a library book about transit station architecture, with a gray cat asleep on her feet. Webb's phone rang. "Preston? Any movement?" "Not yet. She's good at this cache, only no patterns. Either she's had help or she figured it out herself." A pause. "She didn't have help," Preston said. "She doesn't have anyone." Webb said nothing to that. He'd learned not to trust clients' assessments of their subjects. The clients were always wrong about something. "I'll call you Friday," he said, and hung up. He made one more note, looked at the building one last time, walked north. He did not look down. Underground, Miriam turned a page. Fig shifted on her feet, resettled, went back to sleep. 7 blocks north, a man was being paid to find her. Underground, a woman was building something worth finding. Neither of them was hurrying. The leak started small, just a dark patch on the utility room wall, the size of a hand, appearing one morning in week 8, like the wall had finally decided to admit something. Miriam pressed her palm against it. Damp, not wet. Old stone conducting moisture from above, the kind of thing that wasn't dangerous yet, but would be if left alone. She had too much in this station now to leave things. The source was behind a metal access panel bolted into the stone 1950s installation. She could tell from the bolt pattern and the metal gauge. Wrong era for the station. Something added during the conversion, covering whatever was beneath for reasons that weren't immediately obvious. She got her tools. The flathead screwdriver she'd been using since week 1. A wrench. A piece of pipe for leverage. The bolts had opinions. She worked at them 2 evenings, 20 minutes at a time, steady pressure, letting the metal fatigue do the work. On the 2nd evening, the last bolt sheared off, and the panel came away from the wall with a sound like something exhaling. Behind it, a vault door, 2 feet square. Set flush into the original 1931 stone, the panel had just been covering it. Steel, old and dark, and cast directly into the center of it, a monogram CF Continental Fidelity, a combination dial. Brass tarnished, still turning smoothly when Miriam reached out and moved it. She sat back on her heels and looked at it. "Of course," she said quietly. Fig came over, sniffed the door once along the bottom edge, and sat down beside it with the air of a cat who has been given a new assignment and intends to take it seriously. Miriam did not try to open it that night. She went to the library the next morning and spent 3 hours reading about Continental Fidelity, the full history. Federal receivership, 1974. Fraud investigation spanning 11 years. Assets supposedly seized and transferred. She found a 1976 banking industry publication referencing factory default combinations for vault manufacturers active in the 1920s and 30s. Through 2 more databases, she found the compiled list 84 sequences. She wrote them all down in a small notebook. Every one, in order. 2 per evening. She was not going to rush this. The notebook filled slowly. Each evening she'd come down, make tea on the camp stove, sit cross-legged in front of the vault, and try the next 2. She wrote each result, nothing, nothing, nothing. Same handwriting, same pressure. Discouragement was a waste of an evening. She had learned in the past 8 weeks to be careful with her evenings. Combination 58, nothing. Combination 64, nothing. Combination 71, nothing. Combination 72, nothing. Combination 73, the dial moved differently. Not a click, a settling the way a key feels when it finds the right lock. A small, giving way, different in quality from everything before it. Miriam held still. She turned the handle. It opened. Inside 5 metal document boxes stacked. Old, dark, latched but not locked. She lifted the first one out and opened it. Financial records. Ledger's account documents, Continental Fidelity letterhead, dated 1968 to 1973. She read slowly, the way you read something when you're not yet sure what you're looking at. 20 minutes to understand it. What she was looking at was a map of money being moved in the dark, systematically, for years. Shell companies' offshore accounts, client funds routed through mechanisms that required people at every level to know and decide to be part of it. No one had transferred these records when the bank was seized. No one had found them. No one had known they were here. She read for 2 hours. Opened the second box, the third. By the time she reached the fourth, it was past midnight, and Fig had fallen asleep against her leg. In the fourth box near the bottom was an envelope. Not a document box. An envelope letter-sized cream gone slightly brown at the edges. Sealed. Addressed in careful, deliberate handwriting, to whom it may concern, or to federal authorities, whichever comes first. Edmund Voss, Continental Fidelity Bank, Site Manager, October 19, 1972. Miriam sat with it in her hands for a moment. Then she opened it carefully, thumb under the flap, not tearing, taking her time, and unfolded the pages inside. Dear whoever you are, I am not a brave man. I want to be clear about that from the start, because what I am about to describe might sound like bravery, and it isn't. It is the action of a frightened man who couldn't find a better option. But I have a daughter. She is 9 years old, and I want her to live in a world where this kind of thing eventually comes out, where the people who do it are eventually found out, even if it takes a very long time, even if I'm not here to see it. My name is Edmund Voss. I have been the site manager for the Continental Fidelity building since 1965, which means I was responsible for the conversion of the Garrison Street Station in 1951, and I have managed this building's physical plant since then. In the spring of 1971, while performing routine maintenance, I discovered documents in the vault. Documents I was not meant to find. It took me 6 months to understand what I was reading. Another 6 months to find someone I trusted enough to ask. What is in those boxes is a complete record of a financial fraud operating inside Continental Fidelity since at least 1963. Client funds moved offshore. Shell accounts. Arrangements with depositors who wanted their money hidden from tax authorities. The names are in the ledgers. The accounts are in the files. In the fall of 1972, I told my supervisor what I had found. 3 days later, two men I had never met came to my office and explained very calmly, very clearly, what would happen to me and to my family if I continued. I believed them. I did not go to the authorities. I was afraid, and I had a daughter, and I made the choice a frightened man makes. But I could not destroy the evidence. That I could not do. So I am leaving it here, in the vault, with this letter. For whoever comes next, a federal agent or someone else entirely. Someone I cannot imagine who finds this by some other path. If you are reading this, the records are intact. Use them. I am sorry it took so long. Edmund Voss. October 19th, 1972. Miriam read it once. Then again, slower every word. She set it down on the concrete floor beside Fig. A frightened man in 1972 who had a daughter and couldn't find a better option. Who had hidden the evidence written. The letter walked away, not knowing if anyone would ever come. 52 years. She picked up the fifth box. The fifth box was different. Newer paper stock, more recent filing system dates from 2001 to 2011. Not original Continental Fidelity material. Records from a successor institution that had quietly continued offering certain services to certain clients under a different name. Client accounts. Names, numbers, transfer records. Offshore arrangements matching the pattern of the earlier boxes, but updated. Money moved out of reach of tax authorities year after year for a decade. She was on the third page of the client index when she found it. Typed, all caps. Whitfield Preston R. Account established March 2003, referred by D. Whitfield Cross. Account type discretionary offshore class 3. Status active through 2011. Miriam read the name once. She read it again. She sat very still on the concrete floor of a room no one had entered in 50 years, and she read it a third time. Not just hidden assets during the divorce. 20 years. Since 2003. Since the years she had been managing their household, supporting his firm's expansion, believing she knew what their financial life looked like. Routing money through the same network Edmund Voss had tried to expose in 1972. The settlement. $58,000. 14 months. She looked at those numbers now against what was in front of her. Not a fair settlement based on limited assets. A number chosen by a man who knew exactly how much he had and paid her the minimum he thought she'd accept without looking hard enough to find the rest. Fig stirred against her leg, resettled, went back to sleep. Miriam sat without moving. She was not making a plan. She was thinking about Edmund Voss, who had written, "I am not a brave man, and done the brave thing anyway," who had a daughter and wanted her to live in a certain kind of world, who had put the evidence in the wall and walked away and never found out. Edmund Voss had been dead for 31 years. He had never known if anyone would find what he left. He had left it anyway. Miriam sat with that for a long time before she did anything else. She spent the first 3 days making copies. Every page of every ledger, every account document, every transfer record. She photographed them methodically, adjusting the lantern angle when pages were faded, checking each image before moving on. 11 evenings. Everything uploaded to 3 separate cloud accounts, each created on a different library computer on a different day. Then she started reading law. Federal fraud statutes. Whistleblower protection provisions. The regulations governing fraudulent disclosure in divorce proceedings. She was not a lawyer, she knew that clearly, which meant she read carefully, wrote down what she didn't understand. Looked those things up and read everything again. On a Tuesday morning in week 9, while Gerald, the librarian who had never once asked her why she was there so often, was on his lunch break, Miriam sat at the corner computer and sent an encrypted email to a legal aid organization. She described the situation in hypothetical terms, careful and specific. The response came 2 days later. She read it once, then again, then a third time. Divorce settlements based on fraudulent financial disclosure could be reopened. Hidden assets could be seized. A portion could be awarded to the defrauded spouse. The person who committed fraud could face criminal charges. Miriam closed the email, cleared the browser history the way Gerald had once shown her when she'd asked about privacy settings without explaining why. She walked back to the station. She did not celebrate. What she felt was something quieter and more durable than triumph. The steadiness of a person who has confirmed the ground beneath them is solid and can now decide carefully where to step. She gave herself 6 more weeks, not because she needed them, because she wanted to be certain, not just right, but the kind of certain that leaves no gap for a good lawyer to find purchase in. She documented the chain of custody for every document. She photographed the vault door, the access panel, the utility room, the maintenance log with Evos's signature from 1951. Edmund had left the evidence. She was going to make sure it arrived properly. She drafted 4 cover letters, plain factual, no editorializing, printed them at the library, checked every word, from a concerned citizen. She thought exactly that. Week 10, Thursday morning earlier than usual. Miriam came up through the grate at 6:10, replaced it, straightened up, and stopped. Marcus Webb was on the sidewalk 30 feet away outside the Continental Fidelity building. He had a photograph in his hand, 4x6 drugstore print. He was on his phone, not looking her direction. She knew before she could see it clearly that it was her. She turned. Not fast, drew the eye. She turned the way you turn when you've just remembered something in the other direction. Walked half a block to the coffee shop on the corner. Sat at the counter near the back. Ordered tea she didn't want. She looked at her phone. She did not look at the window. 40 minutes. The tea went cold. She ordered another. Everything ordinary, the city not noticing. When she finally looked at the window, the sidewalk was empty. She paid. Left. Walked back to the grate, by a route that added 6 blocks. Underground, she sat on the floor of the station manager's room with Fig in her lap. Her hands were shaking. She noticed this the way you notice a fact. She sat with Fig and waited for them to stop. 20 minutes. Then she got back to work. She mailed the first envelope on a Tuesday. IRS Criminal Investigation Division. Preston's offshore accounts transfer records, a timeline cross-referenced with his filed tax returns. From a concerned citizen. Post office on Delancey, 12 blocks away. She walked in. Dropped it in the slot. Walked out. The following Tuesday, State Revenue Authority. Different post office 9 blocks north. The Tuesday after that, her original divorce attorney. You represented me in Callaway versus Whitfield. Your client, me, was defrauded. Evidence enclosed. File to reopen immediately. Post office on Mercer, 6 blocks east. The fourth Tuesday, U.S. Attorney's Office, Financial Crimes Division. The complete picture. And at the back, in its own sealed inner envelope, original document handle with care. Edmund Voss, Continental Fidelity Bank, October 19, 1972. Found intact. Chain of custody documented. She had thought about this a long time. Edmund had written that letter for federal authorities specifically. He deserved to be heard in his own words, in his own handwriting. A photograph wasn't the same. Post office on Aldgate Street, the same block where she'd found the mattress in week 2. She held the envelope for a moment before letting it go. Then she dropped it in. On Hensley Street, walking back, she passed Ruth's laundromat. 8:40 in the morning. Ruth was in the window turning the sign from closed to open. Ruth looked up. She raised one hand, not a wave, not hello. Just a hand held up briefly. One person acknowledging another person's existence on a Wednesday morning. "I see you." Miriam raised her hand back. She made it half a block before something in her chest gave way. Not broke, just gave the way something gives when it has been held very tightly for a very long time and is finally allowed to be something other than held. She kept walking. Face forward, pace even. She did not stop until she was underground down the 31 steps in the station manager's room with the door closed, where no one could see that she was crying. She sat on the floor with Fig and cried for about 10 minutes. Not for any one thing, not for Preston or the settlement or the 14 months or the 9 evenings with the combination notebook. For all of it together. For Edmund Voss, who never found out. For Ruth, who never asked. For Danny's grandmother on her aunt's couch. For the woman who had stood on a sidewalk 4 months ago with a broken suitcase wheel and started walking north because north was away. Fig sat against her and purred. After 10 minutes, Miriam wiped her face, looked around the room she had made from nothing. Then she made tea and waited. She had not rushed. She had not acted from anger. She had acted from clarity, and there is a very long distance between those two things. 6 weeks after the 4th envelope on a Tuesday morning, Miriam was at the library reading about a photograph. The Garrison Street Station's opening ceremony, 1931. Men in suits on the platform, the tile gleaming white behind them, the green and amber border crisp and new. One man in the center gesturing at something off to the left, the others looking where he pointed, all of them proud of what they'd built. She had been looking at it for 20 minutes. She recognized the platform. She knew exactly where those men were standing. She had sat in that same space and eaten jollof rice from a plastic container and read by LED light and cleaned every square foot of that tile inch by inch with an old toothbrush. It looked in 1931 exactly like what she had made it again. She kept a news tab open in a second window, not checking it constantly, just keeping it there, the way you keep a door open when you're expecting someone you're not sure will come. She glanced at it. Local attorney, arrested in federal tax fraud case. Preston Whitfield, 61, was taken into federal custody this morning following an investigation by the IRS Criminal Investigation Division and the U.S. Attorney's Office for Financial Crimes. Whitfield is accused of tax evasion, fraudulent financial disclosure, and offshore money laundering spanning more than 2 decades. Miriam read the article once. She read it again, slower, every paragraph. Then she looked up. The library ceiling was high and vaulted, an old building, built for something that mattered. She had sat under this ceiling 5 days a week for 5 months, charged battery packs at these outlets, read federal fraud statutes in this chair. She put her hand over her mouth. Not to cry, not to stop a sound. Just because something needed to be held and her hand was what was available. She sat like that for a moment. Then she closed the laptop, gathered her things slowly, the way you move when you're being careful with yourself, slid her notebook into her bag, stood up. She nodded at Gerald behind the circulation desk on her way out. He nodded back, not looking up from his computer. 5 months of Tuesday mornings, and he had never asked her anything. She walked home. Underground, she sat on the couch with Fig and did nothing in particular for about 2 hours. Not celebrating, not planning. Just sitting the way you sit after something large has finished present in it, not ready to move through it yet. Fig purred against her with the steady frequency of a cat who understands her job is simply to be there. The green and amber border ran the full length of the platform. Now she'd finished the last section the week before. The whole border start to finish exactly as it had been in 1931, when those men in suits had stood there and looked proud. She let the quiet do what quiet does when you let it. 3 weeks after Preston's arrest, her attorney called. Diane Whitfield Cross has been charged. The fine is $2.3 million. Probation, no prison time. A pause. I know it's not. It's enough, Miriam said. She sat with that after she said it, checking whether it was true. Not entirely, she knew that. Diane's lawyers had been thorough in ways justice sometimes couldn't keep up with. The accounts directly attributable to her had been technically dissolved before the statute of limitations window. But Diane's firm was gone. Her reputation, the careful, invisible reputation of someone who had operated from the back room for 20 years, was publicly dismantled. The network was exposed. The drawer she had operated from was closed and would not reopen. The world was not completely fair. It never had been. But this was more fairness than most people saw. It was going to have to be enough. 2 months after Preston's arrest, her new attorney called with the settlement terms. The fraudulent disclosure is established beyond any reasonable challenge. We're looking at half the marital assets as a baseline plus punitive consideration for the fraud. The number $7.8 million in cash and assets. There's also the house. You're entitled to it. Sell it, Miriam said. Add the proceeds to the settlement. You don't want to keep it. No. Can I ask? I have a home, she said. He didn't ask further. He was a good attorney. She signed the papers on a Thursday afternoon in his conference room, the first time in almost 5 months she'd sat in an office chair, been offered coffee in a real cup. She signed her name 3 times and thought about a suitcase that pulled left and a grate in the sidewalk on Garrison Street, and 31 concrete steps, and the particular quality of air that had been alone for 70 years. $7. $8 million and a house she didn't want. She walked home. 4 months after the federal case broke open, a letter arrived at her attorney's office. Hand delivery only, personal. She took it underground to read. Station manager's room. She sat on the floor, not the mattress, not the chair. The floor back against the wall in the exact spot she'd sat on the first night when she'd turned off the flashlight and found out she wasn't afraid of the dark. Fig climbed into her lap and settled. Return address, a small town in Ohio. The name P. Voss Hendricks. She opened it carefully. Dear Ms. Calloway, my name is Patricia Voss Hendricks. I am 61 years old. I live in Granville, Ohio, where I have taught middle school history for 34 years. My father was Edmund Voss. My father died in October of 1993. In the last years of his life, he told me more than once, never with much detail, that he had tried to do the right thing early in his career and had not succeeded. He would say it, and then change the subject, and I learned not to push. For 40 years, I carried that. 8 weeks ago, I read a federal court filing online. Your name was in the chain of custody documentation and for evidence submitted in the Whitfield case. The evidence included a document described as a sealed letter found in a vault beneath the Garrison Street station, authored by Edmund Voss, dated October 19, 1972. I sat at my kitchen table for a very long time after I read that. My father hid those records in 1972. He was threatened and he was frightened, and he had a daughter. I was 9 years old, and he did the only thing he could bring himself to do, which was not enough, and also, it turns out, exactly enough. He was right that it would take a long time. He was right that it would come out. I don't know how you found that vault, Ms. Calloway. I don't know what it cost you. I read enough of the public record to understand that it cost something. My father spent the last 20 years of his life believing he had failed. I would like you to know that he did not fail. He did the right thing in the only way available to him, and it took 52 years, and it worked. Thank you for finishing what he started. With gratitude, Patricia Voss Hendricks. Miriam read the letter once. She read it again. She set it down on the concrete floor beside her. Fig was in her lap, warm and steady, purring at the frequency that meant nothing was wrong and nothing was required. And this was simply what being here felt like. Miriam looked at the white tile walls. The brass fixture on the ceiling, the same one since 1931, rewired and cleaned, and kept exactly as it was, because some things should be kept exactly as they are. Edmund Voss had stood in this room, had come back alone in 1972, hidden the evidence, written the letter, walked back up 31 steps, and spent the rest of his life not knowing. He had a daughter. She was 9 years old in 1972 and 61 now, and had carried her father's unfinished sentence for 40 years. He was right, it did take a very long time. But it came out. Miriam lay down on her side on the floor. Fig resettled against her chest and kept purring. Above, through stone and earth and a century of city, the pulse of the living transit system, regular, indifferent, continuous. The same pulse she had felt on the first night when she'd turned off the flashlight and decided to stay without knowing why. She cried not for Preston, who had made every choice that led him where he was going. Not for the settlement or the 14 months or the suitcase that pulled left. She cried for Edmund Voss, who had hidden evidence in a wall in 1972 and written a letter to whoever came next and walked away not knowing. Who had a daughter and wanted her to live in a certain kind of world and had done what he could and then died in 1993, still believing he had failed. Edmund Voss had done the right thing and never seen it matter. He had done it anyway. Miriam lay on the floor of a room he had once supervised and thought about what it cost to be that kind of person and what it might mean to try to be one. She bought the Garrison Street station on a Thursday in November, 11 days after she first contacted the city's municipal property office. She had come prepared: architectural analysis, a preservation proposal, a cultural programming plan. Near the end of the meeting, when the property officer mentioned that decommissioned stations were difficult to move through approval, Miriam mentioned carefully as a separate matter that she had come across documentation of illegal waste disposal in 3 other decommissioned stations during her research. Industrial materials improperly disposed of. She hadn't yet determined the appropriate agency to contact. The city approved in 11 days. She paid $1.9 million, signed the papers in the same conference room where she'd signed the divorce settlement, at a table that looked identical. She thought briefly about the distance between those 2 signings, not the money, not the months, the difference in what she was carrying when she sat down. She hired an architect named Carol Huang, found through the Preservation Society, someone who understood the difference between renovation and restoration. Miriam had one instruction: make it what it was always trying to be. Carol looked at the platform for a long time without saying anything. Then I can do that. The work took 8 months. The vault ceiling restored white tile, regrouted the green and amber border, sealed and stabilized looking, when the scaffolding came down exactly like the photograph from 1931. The brass fixtures rewired with period-appropriate filaments, glowing the way they were meant to glow. The utility rooms became artist studios. The south tunnel became a gallery, its natural curve creating a sequence where art revealed itself around each bend, a different quality of attention than a flat-walled room. The station manager's room Miriam kept exactly as it was. Same white tile, Same brass fixture, rewired but not replaced. Same concrete floor, cleaned and sealed but not resurfaced. The mattress gone, the LED strips gone, the shelf of books gone. Just the room as it had been since 1951. A small card on the door plane type Private Carol had asked about it once. Staff storage. No, Miriam said. Carol was a good architect. She understood that some spaces had uses that weren't in the program. Before the opening night, guests arrived. Miriam went down to the station manager's room alone. She had her old flathead screwdriver with her for the one she'd used since week 1. The one she'd used to pry open the rusted access panel that had led to the vault. She'd been saving one thing for it. In the south gallery, she installed the last shelf bracket herself, pressed the screwdriver against the final screw, and turned it until it held. Then she put it in her jacket pocket and went back up. 60 people, a string quartet. The acoustics in the vaulted platform were extraordinary. The original architects had understood something about sound that had been sitting in the stone for 70 years, waiting for someone to put music back into it. Ruth Okafor was in the front row. Miriam had left the invitation on the laundromat counter 3 weeks earlier, set it down beside Ruth's book without saying anything, the way Ruth had set down the coffee cup without saying anything 8 months before. Ruth arrived in a green dress. A good one, the kind bought for occasions, and kept waiting for the right one. She did not mention coming. Miriam did not mention the dress. The quartet played Schubert Death and the Maiden because it was serious music that didn't apologize for being serious, and this was a serious occasion, even if nobody was announcing it as such. The vault above them held the sound, the way it had been designed to 70 years ago by people who understood that beauty properly built does not require explaining. Fig was not there. Fig was underground in the station manager's room, asleep on the sealed concrete floor, in the particular patch of warmth the LED fixture cast at this hour, doing what she always did, which was exactly what was needed, and nothing else. Preston Whitfield received 6 years in a federal facility. His legal fees consumed most of what remained. Cassandra Lee had left before the indictment. Miriam noted this without satisfaction. She'd seen it coming on the day of the locksmith. The story moved on. 8 months after the Cultural Center opened, a magazine editor called. She'd heard the story third-hand imprecisely. "I'd like to run something. We could send a writer." "I'll write it myself," Miriam said. She did. The Garrison Street Station, on finding home in the last place anyone thought to look. She wrote about the settlement and the 14 months, about the grate and the padlock that had run out of reasons to hold on, about 31 steps and a cat named Fig who had decided first, about Edmund Voss, a frightened man in 1972 who had a daughter and couldn't find a better option, who walked away not knowing, about what it meant to find what he left. She wrote about Ruth's coffee, about Danny Reyes walking back into the dark. She did not write about Patricia Voss Hendricks's letter. Some things are not for publication. Some things belong only to the people in them, and the floor of a small room, and the cat who was present, and the silence that came after. The messages arrived. I thought I was too old. I thought it was too late. I thought I was the only one. Miriam responded to everyone. Not with advice, just with, "You're not finished. You're just at the part that feels like it." She didn't need Preston to understand what he'd lost. She was too busy with what she'd found. 3 weeks after the article came out on a Tuesday evening, Ruth Okafor closed the laundromat at 7 and stood alone in the quiet of it for a moment before she started on the last load. 43 years in this building. She knew the sound of it, empty the machines, winding down, the smell of warm cotton and detergent that had lived in the walls so long it had become the walls. She folded the last load the way she folded everything, each piece given its full attention, corners squared, edges aligned. Someone's white cotton sheets. She didn't know whose. She had stopped needing to know whose a long time ago. The work was the work. The magazine was on the counter where she'd left it. She had read the article 4 times. She had not said this to anyone. She would not say it to Miriam. That was not how things worked between them. And it was one of the things Ruth valued most about how things worked between them. She picked up the magazine. She folded it the way she folded everything, deliberately, with care, taking her time with the corners. Not because a magazine required that kind of care, because the habit of her hands was to treat things as if they deserved it, whether or not anyone was watching. 43 years had made that true of everything she touched. She opened the drawer behind the counter. Inside, a photograph of James, her husband, dead 8 years last March, caught mid-laugh at a family gathering. In 1998, the best picture anyone had ever taken of him, and he had never known it, and that was all right. A birthday card from her youngest grandchild, Adaeze, who had drawn a sun in the corner with yellow crayon because she always drew a sun. A small wooden cross, dark with age, that her mother had carried from Lagos in 1963, in a coat pocket all the way to a new country, because some things you carry regardless of the weight. Ruth placed the folded magazine in the drawer, beside James, beside the cross. She looked at it for a moment. Then she closed the drawer. She turned off the lights. The laundromat went dark, except for the glow of the machines on their final cycles, turning slowly, doing their last work of the day. She put on her coat, locked the door behind her. Outside on Hensley Street, the city was doing what it always did. A bus going east, windows lit, and mostly empty. A dog pulling its person past the laundromat window, nose to the ground, following something important that only dogs could smell. Ruth turned up her collar. She walked home the way she always walked home, unhurried, paying attention the way you walk when you've lived somewhere long enough to know it's worth looking at. She never told Miriam she'd kept it. Some things don't need to be said to be true. If a story like this one found you at the right time, if you've ever been written off by someone who was certain you had nothing left, leave a comment below. Tell us about the moment a stranger treated you like you still mattered. Someone reading right now might need that reminder today. And if you're not subscribed yet, we'll be here next week. Same as always.